Hello, good evening. Welcome to the first episode of Reading, Writing, and Ralph of 2022. I am glad to be here starting off the new year on a good note. Tonight, we welcome author Ken Jack, who wrote Eyes of the Fleet over Vietnam. He is an expert in photographic technology of the RF-8 Photo Crusader. He was also an enlisted service member. Tonight, we will get to see some of those images from that time interspersed throughout the evening. But before we do, I would like to remind you, as usual, we do have trivia, and you will get a chance to win a copy of Ken's book. So, to lead us into tonight's show, let's welcome Ralph. Hello, Ralph. How are you in the new year?
Hello, Grace. I'm doing wonderfully. How about yourself?
I am good. I'm glad to be here. So, tell us a little bit more about our guest I am excited to meet and bring on.
Well, Ken Jack is, as you said, is a enlisted serviceman, so he dedicated some of his life for the service of the country. And he was in photo reconnaissance in Southeast Asia at a very difficult time in the period of the United States when we were entangled in a conflict or war in Southeast Asia, which was unpopular as the war. It grew more unpopular as the war ended, but it turned out to be a very unpopular war in very difficult times. And his book is a fantastic photojournalism of demonstrating. When I looked at it, I was in awe over the power and enormity of the U.S. fleet and the components of the fleet, and became very curious as to how you handle that responsibility. And it's going to be a very interesting discussion with Kenneth, and I think the viewers will enjoy it. And as usual, when we give the trivia question, please type in your name with the answer. So first one in with the correct answer will win an autographed copy of Kenneth Jack's book, Eyes of the Fleet over Vietnam. So let's bring on Ken and get rolling. Hi, Ken.
Hi, Ralph. Thanks for the invitation. Talked with you.
Pleasure. How's the weather over near you?
About the same as where you are. Residents in the same community, so
Yeah, it's a
fairly
golfing
short.
community, so Ken's about a 9-iron away, so he's pretty close. So
That's
welcome,
true.
and
Yeah.
thank you for being tonight's guest, and to give the viewers a chance to know you and your work. So I always ask the authors to tell everyone about yourself, what you did. Uh, uh, your time in the service would be very important, and we want to thank you for your service to our country. And tell us about your experiences. So why don't you get the ball started and tell our viewers about Ken Jack?
Okay, so let's just maybe start with how my early life was. I grew up in two small towns in the suburbs of Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. My parents divorced when I was a very young child. And so consequently, my mother had to support us because my dad was unreliable. And that left me with having a lot of unsupervised time and babysitting my younger sister while she was working. So the reason I bring this up is because during that period, it was the first time that I really started to realize the importance of reading books. Books can take you into a new world. It can help you when you're lonely and depressed or bored. And as a really young kid, around 6 or 7 years old, I started to really read books, and that gave me a love for them for the rest of my life, and ended up actually with writing two books after that. So after that period, my high school was more or less the same. And when I graduated, I decided to go to the Navy without going to the college because I didn't quite know what I wanted to study. And I really wanted to get away from my home life. So the recruiter told me that he would guarantee that I could go to a Navy photo school if my uh, evaluations were high enough, and they were. And in fact, they fulfilled their promise, and I started out the Navy career in a photo school in Pensacola, Florida. I really had an advantage over my classmates because I had been doing photography since I was about 7 years old. And I took a picture of a hair underneath a microscope with my box brownie and took that film home and developed it and brought the picture into my teacher. And it was quite an experience. And after that, I was the junior high school and high school photographer for the yearbook and newspaper. So I really had a good start in photography when I started the Navy's photo school. But they have much more sophisticated cameras than I was working with, and that was a good experience for me. And in the course of that school, toward the end, the instructor got to the chapter on, or the curriculum on aerial photography. But he opened it up with saying that we have to present this material to you, but none of you will ever use this information. Well, as it turned out, when we graduated and we all got our orders for our next duty station, 1/3 of the class went to the heavy photographic squadron in Jacksonville, and the other third went to the light photographic squadron in Jacksonville. And that was where I ended up, in the light photographic squadron. The difference between light and heavy is that the heavy has the larger 2-engine aircraft, and the light had fighter jets that were designed for fast maneuverability and low flying. So my Navy career, I can maybe go into more detail later
Okay.
if you wish. But then after about the end of my tour, I decided I wanted to go to college. So I got discharged in July of 1963. So I was in the Navy from 1959 to 1963. When I got discharged from the Navy, I went home, and unemployment was really high at that time. And I wanted to work a year to get some money for college, and so I did that. And after that period, I went to Penn State University in May of 1964. And I went straight through, summers included, and I was able to finish a 4-year degree in 3 years. My major was education, mathematics education. Then I got a job teaching school in New Kensington, Pennsylvania. I taught advanced math there for 13 years. And after that, or after 13 years, I had an opportunity to go to work in private industry. So I applied for a job at Westinghouse Electric Corporation in their nuclear division for nuclear power plants, and they hired me, and I was a software engineer for 21 years, working on very sophisticated programs for simulating nuclear power plants, giving training to the operators of power stations and so forth. After 21 years with Westinghouse, my wife and I retired to a very wild, desolate area in northern Pennsylvania. We built our own home prior to retiring, and my wife and I actually did a lot of the work in the completion of building the house. We stayed there for 14 years and found out that we were starting to get too old to maintain the property and the house. So we decided to move closer to our son in Virginia, and that's how I ended up in Delaware.
Yeah, that's a great story. So, so you were in the military until '63. So, from a public perspective, that's just about the time Vietnam started to heat up. From what I remember, it was still kind of low on the radar screen until the later '60s. But so how did you decide to, go about putting a book together on Vietnam and the role of photo reconnaissance in Vietnam?
So, in retirement, I became the webmaster for my squadron website, vfp62.com, and I designed the pages for the website, and I programmed them actually, the software. And along the way, I got to meet a lot of pilots, and so I had a wide network of connections in the pilot community. And sometime around the 50th anniversary of the Cuban Missile Crisis, the son of my former commanding officer in my squadron, VFP 62, contacted me to see if I could help him find an author for his father's memoir, which he wrote, the father did, telling about my squadron's first flights over the Soviet nuclear missiles in Cuba during the Cuban Missile Crisis. It's a largely unknown story that the Navy had a critical role in the resolution of the Cuban Missile Crisis. And his father's memoir had to deal with the fact that he was commanding the squadron during that time, and he made the first mission over the missile sites at that time. However, they had trouble publishing the book, and because it was too thin, and he asked me to help him find an author that was good at military history to expand it. And the contacts that I made, they were all busy at the time. So I asked him whether or not I could uh, give writing the book or extending the book myself, and they gave me approval. Well, out of that came my first book, Blue Moon over Cuba, Aerial Reconnaissance during the Cuban Missile Crisis. And so that was in 2012. So let's fast forward then 11 years, and I'm in the COVID crisis, and I'm thinking about another book. And it came to me that there was a lot of similarity between the Cuban Missile Crisis um, and what was going on in Vietnam, and that at the time, President Trump was talking about getting out of Afghanistan. And to me, that sounded an awful lot like what really happened in Vietnam. And I was thinking that it was going to end the same way as Vietnam did. And so that made me start thinking about I'd like to write a book, something related to that kind of a fiasco, and at the same time highlight the role of servicemen in these wars that end up in failure. So I put together in my mind a narrative of using the Vietnam War and photo reconnaissance as the means for telling the story of naval aviators, what they went through, what their sacrifices were, and the men that supported them, the maintainers, like I was in pre-Vietnam. And so I put together a narrative, and I proposed it to a couple publishers. It was a very bad time to try to get a book published because all the publishers had their staffs were at home, and they weren't taking many submittals. And so I was fortunate that one of the ones that I sent my narrative to was Casemate, which is a company that's that's in the United Kingdom, and they have an office here in Pennsylvania. But I did all of but they accepted my narrative, and so we started to develop it from that point.
Terrific. Terrific. So what I want to do next is I want to show the audience a clip from video and photos you put together, because when I started going through your book, the thing that struck me was the absolute power and enormity of all the pieces of the fleet. So why don't you give the audience a snippet of what they're about to see, and then we'll show it.
Sure. There are 180 photos in the book, and the nice thing that Casemate did was they embedded the photos right into the text. Versus and it's more expensive to do that. Versus what other publishers do, they clump them all together, and you read material and you don't get to see the picture until later on, and you forget all how you connect the two. So that was really nice. So the video that we're going to show here are photos right out of the book, and the first two that we'll be seeing, the first one really shows a number of the aircraft carriers that were involved in my book stories. And the end of the first video shows one of the super carriers, the Kitty Hawk. And the Kitty Hawk is involved in chapters 1 and chapters 2. And the other carriers that you see in that are involved in the entire book. They're the smaller deck carriers. So you'll notice the size difference between these. The photo reconnaissance our squadron, the photo reconnaissance squadron did with the RF-8 was on the smaller deck carriers. And then the second video shows aircraft from the United States Marine Corps aviation group that assisted the Navy in the first couple years of the war, 1964, 1965. They augmented the photo reconnaissance detachments on the carriers, and they had a difficult job and an unknown job that most people don't know about, and most books don't talk about the Marine contribution in aviation. And while I'm saying that, there's two things I want to point out. Is there were two air wars in Vietnam, the war in the South and the war in the North. My book covers the one in the North. The difference was that when a pilot got in his airplane in the South, he was confident that he was going to make it back home because there wasn't the defenses in the South to shoot down aircraft that there were in the North. The pilots that got into the aircraft while flying over North Vietnam never knew if they were going to make it back to the carrier or not. So the second video covers that material there. So.
Fascinating photos, that's for sure. And when you think about it from the perspective that those are almost 60 years ago, and
Yes.
you think about the technology and the power of our armament today, it's incredible. So tell the audience, Eyes of the Fleet, what that means, what it would mean to somebody who's 23, 22 years old with, a plethora of responsibility sitting there on those missions and what they mean.
Yeah, that's a good question. Eyes of the Fleet really is an acronym for uh, describing photo reconnaissance aircraft of all sorts. Well, of the particular sort of the RF-88 Crusader. It was the name that the squadron on the West Coast, VFP 63, which is an acronym for Light Photographic Squadron 63. The Navy has two names for everything. And I just want to say quickly is that I'm aware of the fact that many people have difficulty reading military books because of the acronyms and jargon. And in my book, what I did is I defined and redefined the acronyms within the text continuously. And I also have pages at the end of the book that redefine them back there to help that situation out. But Eyes of the Fleet was just a name, clever name, that the squadron decided describes their job in naval aviation. And basically, it was giving the fleet commanders the intelligence that they needed to prosecute the war. And in the North, uh, photographic reconnaissance was flown by a multitude of aircraft. The RF-8A was flown by the Navy from its carriers, the smaller deck carriers, and then there were other aircraft that did other reconnaissance from the others. So this book covers the RF-8A and G models of the Crusader, which was a supersonic jet filled with cameras that could shoot photos from 50,000 feet down to treetop level and had marvelous cameras installed in them to get the pictures that would be later interpreted for the commanders to make pre-bombing missions decisions and also battle damage assessment after the strike was done so that they could see if anything needed to be hit afterwards. So, and it was most people don't realize that photo reconnaissance went all the way back to World War One, and so it's been used by the military for every war that we've ever had, and its job is to give the information that they need to prosecute a war more efficiently.
So you're sitting there and uh, these pilots are going out, and you've been responsible for giving them the details and the data to make them as safe and to hit targets and or pick up whatever information. And did you ever think about the prospect of being wrong and what that might mean and lead to? And I know there was one instance you bring up in the book. I think it was a Len Johnson, whose plane got lost. And how would someone feel when they go through something like that?
Yeah, you think that in the 1960s when we had atomic weapons and so forth, um, that navigation as we know it today for aircraft wasn't as sophisticated then. Many of the fighters and photo reconnaissance jets at that time didn't have very much in the way of navigation equipment. They basically knew how to get from point A to point B by coordinates and timing their distance on key points arrived from a map to get to their location. And when you're over jungle areas, it's harder to find the key points which you can pinpoint and say, well, okay, I know where this is. Now I know where I'm going next. And then you look for it. You know what directions to point the aircraft in to get there. And so getting lost isn't as ironic as it sounds. In his case, which that's a marvelous story, by the way, because he's a young pilot. And the thing about photo pilots missions is that the photo pilot is always the lead and his escort is always the wingman, even if the wingman has a higher rank than the photo pilot. And so in his case, he got busy looking at the ground because he was following a road, taking pictures of it, and he didn't realize how far north he was going, and he ended up in Hanoi. And that is one of the most heavily defended areas in North Vietnam, and the place where many aircraft were shot down. Well, when he got back to the carrier, he still hadn't quite known where he was when he was taking his photos until the photo interpreters, when they were looking at the film that he shot, found out that he was actually over one of the most highly defended areas in North Vietnam. So he could have been probably or disciplined for that, but he was a new pilot, and the photos that he took were so valuable that they actually gave him a medal.
Wow.
So it's the
Great
fog
story.
of war. It's the old fog of war issue.
Mhm.
Is that things happen?
Yeah. Yeah, they do. And, I can't imagine what it feels like when the pilots are going on their uh, their mission and the period that they're gone. How much angst um, must be felt back at the headquarters or wherever the crew is that's responsible for the mission.
Yeah, are you referring to when they actually get shot down and don't come back, or they?
Yeah, or any
Yeah,
or up when you realize they're in danger.
yeah. Uh, well, there's many incidents. In fact, many of the stories in the book are from pilots telling their stories and what they faced in the process. And like I said before, North Vietnam was a very dangerous place to fly over. The United States lost a lot of aircraft and a lot of pilots. Um, VFP 63, which is the photo squadron that the book is primarily about, lost 31 aircraft, which is a lot because uh, VFP 63 supported carriers by sending out detachments, and detachments is a smaller group of planes and pilots. So when they lose 31 aircraft, you're talking about often two or three per mission per deployment. And so the tragedies that occurred are documented in my book in two ways. One, I describe the non fatal shootdowns at the end of every chapter and describe how they were lost. And in most cases, they were, well, in that situation, the non fatal, they either ended up with the pilot becoming a POW, a prisoner of war, which VFP 63 had 6,
Mhm.
or they were rescued. And there were a number of rescues. The process, however, was always that they were ejecting from an aircraft to escape an aircraft that was exploded, or like the title or the picture on the first page of the book, it shows an aircraft on fire, and so they had to eject out of the aircraft, and that's always a dangerous proposition. So on the non-fatals, they either ended up as a prisoner of war or rescued. And then the other situation I write about at the end of every chapter are the fatalities. And on those situations, the pilot was killed, and I describe in the memorials to them about them and how they died when we could tell, and also um, finding the remains after the war ended and bury them in uh, with honor back in the United States. And the memorials in the book, I think, are the most I don't know, tense for me, writing and reading it. In many cases, it brought some of the stories bring tears to my eyes. Still get bad thoughts of them. Uh,
Yeah,
so,
yeah, the tributes are written with a lot of emotion, and you can feel, your what you went through in those memorials. So they are very touching. The we're going to get into the next segment of video in a second, but I do want to give the first trivia question, or the only trivia question, actually. Sorry, guys. So the question is, on a full-size aircraft carrier, how many football fields can you fit? So again, how many football fields can you fit on a full-size aircraft carrier? So why don't you describe to the folks what the next video is going to show? And again, it'll be about 1.5 to 2 minutes. So.
right. Well, just get into telling you about the prisoners of war. And the first prisoner of war in the Vietnam War, the first aviator prisoner of war, was a photo pilot from VFB 63. It was over Laos in 1964, and it was before the war was approved by Congress. The air war was approved by Congress. And this pilot actually escaped from the prison camp in Laos, and his name was Chuck Klossman, and his photos are at the very beginning of the third video we're going to see, and then after that, it shows pictures of an actual rescue of a pilot that had ejected at sea, and the fourth video shows some of the dangers of aviation on a carrier that are not combat related, but it's when an aircraft has a problem that landing, he has to go into what's called an arrestment barrier. And there's a lot of pictures that are shown there of aircraft being caught by this arrestment barrier on the flight deck that salvages the airplane and saves the pilot.
Okay.
So that's part of and then additionally, it shows some flight deck activity, which I hope we get into a little bit later in the discussion. It shows a rescue helicopter, and it shows the Sidewinder missiles, which the fighters had to shoot down MiG aircraft, which were encountered of the north.
All right. Fantastic stuff there. Um, you said something in the book that um, servicemen were worried about just as much from enemy fire, but as other things going wrong on a carrier or a ship. Um, and you talked about the USS Oriskany fire. Explain what or describe to the audience what that means and why at that time people were so afraid of even non-combat related tragedies from happening.
Yeah, that's an excellent question, Ralph. Uh, when I was thinking about how the book should begin, um, I wanted the word death to be the very first word that the reader would read. Um, that changed. And it's not what actually how the book starts now, but I do have in the preface and the introduction before chapter one the dangers that are faced by the enlisted men working on the carrier and the accidents that can occur on a carrier's flight deck where you're surrounded by jet blasts and the danger of being sucked into an engine if you get too close to the intake, and just failures that occur in the complicated process of launching a big aircraft into the air in a very short distance from a catapult. Uh, so the work on a flight deck is perhaps one of the most dangerous jobs in the world. I spent a lot of time in my 3.5 years in the squadron on flight decks. I describe in the book an accident that killed a pilot 200 feet from me as I was walking back uh, from a from our aircraft being launched. The sight of that aircraft going over the edge of the flight deck uh, and the pilot not surviving that fall and not being able to get out of the aircraft to save himself has really been with me my entire life. And when you see something like that, it does affect you, and it also affects the pilots. The pilots that are friends with others that get shot down, or a pilot that has to gather the personal effects of a pilot that was either a POW or killed, and have to prepare those personal effects to be sent back to the home. Those are haunting images of what pilots experience. Also, the danger in on carriers is the fact that there's bombs everywhere, and that if fire breaks out, danger could put the aircraft carrier actually in jeopardy. And I have two stories of fires in the book. The one was on the Forstall in 1967, which was in South China Sea. It was perhaps the worst fire in modern carrier operations. 132 men died. I have very vivid pictures, which we'll see some here shortly in the videos, that show the damages of the bombs exploding when the fire started to heat them up. And that accident happened by a rocket that was misfired on the flight deck by an accident that went into the fuel tanks of other aircraft and started a gargantuan fire. And on the Oriskany, that fire is vividly told in chapter 6 or chapter 4 by a pilot that lived through that event, and 34 were killed in that accident. And reading the description of the Reconnaissance fire by uh, Lieutenant Coltrane is really amazing reading. Um,
Yeah,
so, yeah.
that's good. So let's go back to 1962 or 63, and you step foot on an aircraft carrier, and you're surrounded by all of this armament and bombs and jet planes and escort ships, and, destroyers, I guess. And you look around for the first time. What goes through your mind?
You're really awed by the size of an aircraft carrier. You're constantly getting when you're new to the carrier. You're constantly getting lost in the passageways, getting to where you want to go. The size of the flight deck is amazing, even for the smaller carriers, so-called small deck carriers. Which my first aircraft carrier was the USS Shangri-La, which is a World War II carrier. Still had a wooden flight deck.
Hmm.
Um, and and when you go to the flight deck for your first time, um, you're you're in a place where you know you're in constant danger. Uh, you could be blown over the side of the ship by an exhaust of an aircraft. You could be involved in a fire. You could be killed by a propeller, which was one of the biggest fears of, especially at nighttime, working on a flight deck. Makes matters much worse.
Yeah,
Uh, the
thought of that.
the carrier itself, I mean, it's not like living on in a small city. It has everything there. It has barbershops. It has a hospital. It has restaurant to eat and a library, which I made a lot of use of in the time I was on there. Um, yeah, it's an awesome experience. It's the effect that it's had on me it has lasted a lifetime. I think of it every day. I think of the Navy experience every day of my life. Uh, I think back on those times, and it makes you wonder sometimes how you actually got through it. And I'm actually saying that that's true in peacetime as well as wartime. It's worse in wartime, of course.
Yes, of course. Yeah, much worse. So let's go to the third video segment. And so, uh, tell the audience what they're about to see.
Okay, so as we were talking, Eyes of the Fleet is about photographic reconnaissance. The idea is that you get these pictures of the area that you want to strike, and part of that is battle damage assessment. And what we'll see in the first one are actual pictures of photos that were taken by crusaders, and they show the various targets that were hit and the damages that are seen. And the whole idea is that those photos are taken and interpreted, and they're evaluated in terms of how effective the bombing campaign was, and also do they need to be restruck. And let's see, one of those is the Hall Bridge, which was notorious for taking many pilots, their aircraft, and many were killed. And I hope we get a chance to talk a little bit about the Hall Bridge, because it was an obsession of the military to take out, and it took to the end of the war before they actually dropped it into the water. And then the last video is it actually shows the 10 pilots that were killed in VFB 63. A little bit about them, shows their photos. Um, and it shows the living conditions of living on a carrier. There's one shot of where we sleep in the luxurious compartments. And so that's what we're going to be looking at next.
wonderful, wonderful pictures, not Hollywood reproductions, but actual photos that are just very, very emotional and powerful. And as we begin to wrap up, I've got two questions. One, there was a photo of a SAM unit, I think in Vietnam, and they had their hands all raised. What was that about?
Yes, it's important to say SAM stands for Surface to Air Missile. Um, Pilots described them as flying telephone poles. It was one of the three dangers they faced. They faced anti-aircraft ammunition. They surface-to-air missiles was a very big threat, and MiG aircraft, Soviet aircraft that the North Vietnamese flew against our aircraft. So in that picture, it shows a SAM site with the crew in a victory kind of way, with their hands up in the air, saying, "Yeah, we'll get you," and they did in a lot of cases. The SAMs were very effective. We did develop techniques for them to avoid them, and they were effective as well. Plus, the photography that we brought back of SAM sites helped eliminate the sites when they were discovered, and there are several stories in the book about that.
And the final point is there was a map in there, and it showed the Thane Ho Bridge, and it's the
Yeah.
teeny little speck. Why was there such an obsession with that bridge?
Good question to end this. It was a place that showed North Vietnam defiance against the United States, and it also showed where the United States was resolute in trying to take that bridge down. And it was very well constructed, and it resisted a lot of a lot of bomb damage for many times. It was also very difficult to hit because it was a small bridge, and it was very heavily defended. As I mentioned before, many pilots and aircraft were lost over the Thunhall Bridge. So it was finally brought down at the end of the war by a pilot that eventually became, and his strike group, that became a four-star admiral. And I don't know if we have any time for me to read what he said, but basically, I have that story at the end of the chapter 7, how that bridge was finally brought down. And the thing about it was the introduction late in the war of so-called smart bombs. Smart bombs were the ones that the pilot could actually guide to the target rather than having it being what the dumb bombs were, just basically floating in the air down to the target. Once they left the aircraft, they were on their own. And it was the skill of the pilot to get them to hit where they were supposed to hit. And a lot of the pictures we show bomb damage that wasn't near the target. So the smart bomb is what brought it down, and that really was the beginning of modern warfare, which was used in Iraq and Afghanistan, and our most modern war, where the very
Yeah,
accurate bombs now.
great. So what's next, Ken? You have a next book on the agenda, or you're going to relax and take up golf here in the community?
No, no more books. They're very difficult to do. It takes a lot of time. I describe it as having a jealous mistress. Uh, my wife Darlene was very supportive in both of my books. She's read the manuscripts at various stages, and she is now just finished reading the final book. Um, and she came to me one day, and I can say real quickly here, one she said she came in one morning and she says, "Ken, I know you think I'm taking a long time reading your book," she says, "but I just am having a difficult time reading it." And I said, "Whoa, my wife is saying she's having a tough time reading it." she sat down and she had tears in her eyes, and she was saying that she realizes after reading the book how much she didn't appreciate or know about the sacrifice that U.S. service people make in war, and that she felt guilty about it.
Well,
And that
that's a
was,
good statement. And, it's kind of funny you should say that because I was thinking how to close the show as we were going through those photos, and it's very easy as Americans, and I remember sitting back as a 11 and 12-year-old, reading about what was the conflict in the Southeast Asia, and we'd see 5 pilots dead, 6 servicemen dead on a daily basis, and you're so disconnected from the reality that you don't really appreciate, as you said, the sacrifices being made by the servicemen out there. And I think we need to all be more aware of that sacrifice as we hold on to our democracy, our republic, actually.
yeah, and that's one of the goals of the book, is to help
Right.
people know that.
Right. Well, Ken, thanks for coming on. I enjoyed it. I hope everyone uh, who viewed tonight buys the book. Where can they get it? Is it on Amazon, Google?
Yes, definitely. If they want to read more about the book, Amazon has a page on the book. There's electronic ebook available, and also the hard copy. It has probably one of the best prices going right now, and it has. We're building it up steadily. More and more information about the book. There's a table of contents and a lot of information on that page. So, yeah, that's one of the better places right now to get the book.
Great. Appreciate you coming on, and we'll see you around the corner.
Yes. Thanks again. Appreciate it. It's been good
Okay.
talking to you. Bye now.
All right, well, what an epic way to welcome back ZTV into the new year. I am excited for the shows we have lined up. We will be welcoming Ralph back in 2 weeks at the end of the month. So until we do, remember to be the good news in someone's life.